Hello everyone, Phoenix Knight here. Welcome to the channel, and welcome to the 1985 season recap and reveal show. It's been about 2 weeks since the 1985 World Series wrapped up, which means my break from non-scheduled videos is officially over. Before we dive into today's main event though, let's talk about the off-season content schedule for a little bit. I've got a clearer idea of what things are going to look like over the next few months, and there are going to be some changes to my streaming schedule. Weeknights aren't going away entirely, but I'm shifting things around a bit. Tuesday will remain a small stream night, but I'm dropping Thursday as a regular stream night during the off-season. During a project, Thursday works fine, even accounting for the laundry interruption, but in the off-season, I'll probably appreciate having the night off more often than not. I could occasionally use it for a small stream, but expect it to be a non-stream night most weeks. So this would be something like an unboxing, a very small game, something like that. But more often than not, as I mentioned, Thursday is going to be an off night. To balance that out though, I will be adding Monday, Friday, and Saturday as stream nights. Monday and Friday will be similar to Wednesday, smaller games. Saturdays will be more flexible, and a lot of that is going to turn on whether Mystical Munchies features a dinner entree. If it does, I'll switch to a morning game. I'll also adjust the size of the game based on whether my game group is getting together on a Saturday at my local game store. If my group isn't getting together, then the game will be bigger, or multiple smaller games, especially if Mystical Munchies is smaller. Hopefully that all makes sense. You can feel free to ask me any questions about that. With the schedule update out of the way, let's move to the main event. This is going to be a little bit more of a chill stream as well, so if there's anything you guys want to ask me, we'll make this an AMA stream as well. If there's anything you guys want to ask me for AMA, just leave it with an AMA tag, and I'll get to that. I'll be very interactive with chat today. But we'll stick with normal AMA rules. Nothing, basically just don't be too personal about it. If you wouldn't want it asked of you, don't ask it of me. But let's jump in and we'll start recapping the games. The first game that we had on the channel, of course, was the 1985 demo game. As I've mentioned before, hold on a second. There we go. That'll make it a lot easier to read my chicken scratches. As I've mentioned before, the demo games on the channel, I actually need one more thing over here before we get to the reveal portion of the show, so I'm going to do that now before I forget. I've talked about this before, but the demo games on the channel are going to involve the World Series or the previous championship round between the two teams in the last replay. So in this case, 1985 would have been based on the historical teams, the 1985 demo game would have been the Kansas City Royals hosting the St. Louis Cardinals. Since I'm doing it based on my previous replay, it was the Oakland Athletics at the Pittsburgh Pirates, which the Pirates ended up winning the demo game 1-0. We're also going to be picking a game of the year as well. And spoiler alert, it is definitely not going to be the 1985 demo game, especially since both teams turned out to be very forgettable, as the word will go with, in 1985. But we'll talk more about that during the standings a little bit later during the replay, or during the reveal show. Block 1 on New Year's Day took us over to Tiger Stadium in Detroit, Michigan, where the Detroit Tigers were hosting the Cleveland Indians. The Indians turned out to win that game 4-2, with Cleveland getting 4 runs on 12 hits and 1 error, and the Tigers getting 2 runs on 8 hits and no errors. And that was actually a pretty good game, with Burt Blyleven and Jack Morris being the starting pitchers for that one. That's a possible Game of the Year candidate, but probably not. I know there have been some better games coming out of this one. And if you guys are in chat and want to weigh in on what you think is the Game of the Year, feel free to weigh in. But once Jester and Philip Anderson come in, they've been with me for most of the ride through this replay, so I'm definitely going to give their consideration a whole lot more weight. Not to say I won't listen to you guys in chat, as far as the rest of you guys in chat, as far as what the Game of the Year should be, but like I said, they've been with me most of the way in this replay, so their opinion is going to carry a lot of weight with me. Anyway, Block 2 brought us to April 12th, 1985, as we went to Three Rivers Stadium for the defending World Series champion coming into this replay, Pittsburgh Pirates, to host the St. Louis Cardinals. The Cardinals won this game on 8 runs, 11 hits, and 1 error, to the Pirates scoring 4 runs on 5 hits and 1 error. Curt Koepscher was against Larry McWilliams for that one. The scheduling got a little bit screwed up because I didn't have enough days for this block. Usually I play 1 game per 4 days of baseball. It turns out I only got 1 per 3 into block 3 as I started the 3rd block a little bit early. We had the Chicago White Sox heading to Fenway Park to play the Boston Red Sox. That was Tom Seaver against Bruce Hurst. The White Sox ended up winning that game, 5 runs on 12 hits and no errors, to the Red Sox 3 runs on 9 hits and no errors. I don't normally track the winning pitchers, but I did start keeping track of historical comparisons. So the Tigers historically won block 1, the Indians won that, Pirates historically won 6-4 in block 2, so season ticket kind of made a mess of history. This was the first one where they kind of agreed, where the White Sox historically won 6-5, but the White Sox picked this one up 5-3. As for block 4, bringing us to April 19th, 1985, the New York Mets were at Veterans Stadium to take on the Philadelphia Phillies. Dwight Gooden against Steve Carlton, another good pitching matchup. But the Mets blew the Phillies away 7-0. Mets historically won 1-0, so the Mets definitely got their offense on in this one. As for block 5, on April 23rd, 1985, the Seattle Mariners were at the Metrodome to take on the Twins. Salome Barojas was starting for the Mariners against Frank Viola for the Twins. The Mariners won 5-4 in 10 innings. That ended up being 5 runs on 12 hits and no errors. The Twins had 4 runs on 13 hits and no errors. I think Barojas is a closer right now in 1983, where RJL is into his league championship series round. So kind of interesting to see how Barojas evolved from a closer in 1983 to a starter in 1985. Then moving into April 27th, 1985 for block 6, the San Diego Padres were at Dodger Stadium to take on the Los Angeles Dodgers, which the Padres won that game by a final score of 4-1, and I think I had to adjust something in Digital Diamond. Andy Hawkins was up for the Padres against Tom Brennan for the Dodgers. Padres won on 4 runs on 10 hits and no errors. Dodgers had 1 run on 10 hits and 2 errors. We'll come back to the errors later on in the replay because there was definitely a much bigger catastrophe for errors coming for the Dodgers. And the Padres historically won 4-3, so they got that one right. As for block 5, the Twins historically won 4-2, so season ticket made a mess of history once again. And that's going to be a theme during this coming out of this replay, is that history and season ticket often didn't agree with each other. Next up, we had a pretty dramatic game in block 7 on May 1st, 1985, as the Milwaukee Brewers played the Oakland Athletics. The Athletics actually won this one in dramatic walk-off fashion, and finally decided that, hey, it's okay for home teams to win, because it turned out this was the first time that a home team had actually won during the replay. The Athletics won this one on 3 hits and 12 hits and 1 error, where the Brewers had 2 runs on 6 hits and no errors. The Brewers historically won 7-4, so once again, history didn't agree. And the entire replay is up in a playlist on my channel. You guys can go find it there and binge watch everything if you want to. We then went to Busch Stadium as the St. Louis Cardinals hosted the San Francisco Giants. Dave LaPointe for the Giants against Joaquin Andujar for the Cardinals. The Cardinals won this one in blowout fashion between 9 runs on 12 hits and 1 error. The Giants had 1 run on 10 hits and 2 errors. And Philip Anderson is now first to join us here at the recap show. I will pull that aside as game of the year, as a potential game of the year candidate. If there's anything that catches your eye as I'm going through these, Philip, let me know and I'll put it to the side. Same thing will hold true for Chester when he stops in. Then we went over to Jack Murphy Stadium, I think it was for the Padres. The San Diego Padres were hosting the Pittsburgh Pirates. The Padres actually won this one 4-3 in 10 innings as well. Padres had 4 runs on 10 hits and 1 error. The Pirates had 3 runs on 10 hits and 1 error as well. We went through a lot of pitchers in this one. And apparently I kept stats for this one. I don't remember why. But anywho, we'll put that to the side for the time being in the rest of the stack. So I probably didn't... I mentioned this only sparingly during the replay, but this was the first replay that I had a house rule around fast score and long games, especially on weeknights, where if a game went 12 innings if a game went 12 innings on a weeknight, I was going to finish it with a clutch roll in fast score, because I didn't want to have a very long game when I knew I needed to get up for work. The Padres historically won Block 9 1-0. So again, history somewhat agreed, and the Giants historically won 5-0 on their game. So again, history is a little bit sporadic here. Two teams, and Block 10 on May 13th, 1985, brought us two teams that were definitely on the upswing for this. We definitely heard a lot from these two teams during the replay. The Montreal Expos were at the Astrodome to take on the Houston Astros. The Astros won this one 2-1, 2 runs on 7 hits and no errors for the Astros, 1 run on 5 hits and no errors for the Expos. Joe Hesketh was up for the Expos against Nolan Ryan for the Astros. The Astros historically won 3-2, so a 1-run margin, right team winning. That was one season ticket apparently got right. And file the Expos against the Astros away. We will be coming back to that one later on in the replay. May 17th, 1985, brought us back to Cleveland Stadium as the Cleveland Indians hosted the Boston Red Sox. Roger Clemens was up for the Red Sox against Burt Blyleven for the Indians. Cleveland won this one 4 runs on 13 hits and no errors, and to 3 runs on 6 hits and no errors for the Red Sox. And you're getting a little bit spoilerific on me, Philip, but yes, indeed, the eventual world champion Montreal Expos. And once again, we'll even come back to that matchup between the Expos and the Astros. That is hardly the last time we will see that in this replay. Block 12 brought us to May 21st, 1985, for a visit to Wrigley Field as the Chicago Cubs hosted the Cincinnati Reds. The Cubs looked like they were going to be a threat at the time, but as we'll see later on, not so much. The Cubs won this one, though, 4 runs on 10 hits and no errors, to the Reds 3 runs on 8 hits and 2 errors. John Stuper was the pitcher for the Reds against Ray Fontenot starting for the Cubs. Thank you guys for spending part of your Saturday or your Sunday afternoon your Easter Sunday with me. I realize some of you might be wrestling fans as well and wanting to watch WrestleMania Night 2 later tonight. So that's part of why I wanted to try to get this done a little bit earlier. That and my normal Sunday game day fell apart on me, so I wanted to take advantage of that. Block 13 brought us to Anaheim Stadium on May 25th, 1985, for a matchup between the Baltimore Orioles and the California Angels. Dennis Martinez was on the hill for the Orioles against Ron Romanick for the Angels. The Angels won this one 4 runs on 12 hits and no errors, to the Orioles 2 runs on 5 hits and no errors. That was a pretty good one, but also not Game of the Year worthy, I don't think. Block 14 on May 29th, 1985, brought us to Comiskey Park in Chicago, Illinois, on the south side, I believe, for a matchup between the Toronto Blue Jays and the Chicago White Sox. That the Blue Jays turned out to win 5 runs on 11 hits and 1 error, to 3 runs on 4 hits and no errors for the White Sox. Starting pitcher was Jim Clancy for the Blue Jays against Britt Burns for the White Sox. White Sox were another team that looked like they were going to be a threat in this replay, but not so much. White Sox historically won 8-5 in that block. The Angels historically won 5-3. So again, mixed results continuing for the replay. Block 15 brought us to June 2nd, 1985. Fun fact, my parents' first wedding anniversary. For the Oakland Athletics, taking on the Baltimore Orioles. This was Mike Warren for the Athletics against Scott McGregor for the Orioles. The Orioles won this one 6-5. 6 runs on 7 hits and no errors, to 5 runs on 10 hits and no errors for the Athletics. Another great game, but again, not a Game of the Year candidate. And somehow we had gone over a dozen blocks without featuring the New York Yankees, and oh boy. The Yankees must have been mad in this one, as they were at Milwaukee County Stadium to play the Milwaukee Brewers. Ed Whitson was starting for the Yankees against Danny Darwin for the Brewers. Yankees won this one, 11 runs on 15 hits and no errors, to 6 runs on 18 hits and 1 error for the Brewers. I'm guessing both pitchers must have forgotten how to pitch in this one. That's the only thing I can surmise. Definitely not a Game of the Year candidate, though. That's for sure. June 10th, 1985 brought us to Block 17. Before we get to that, Brewers historically won 5-1. June 10th, 1985 in Block 17 saw us go to Atlanta Fulton County Stadium for the Atlanta Braves hosting the San Francisco Giants. The Braves won this one running away from the Giants, 10 runs on 9 hits and no errors, to the Giants 4 runs on 11 hits and 1 error. Jim Gott was the starting pitcher for the Giants against Zane Smith for the Braves. This one was picked because Zane Smith was the MVP of 1991's World Series. He was a Pirate then, though, and I did want to feature Zane Smith on the channel at least once from being the MVP of the World Series. I think we'd gone even longer into the replay before we actually featured the historical World Series champion Kansas City Royals. June 14th, 1985 brought us up to the Kingdome in Seattle, Washington for a matchup between the Kansas City Royals and the Seattle Mariners. Danny Jackson was on the hill for the Mariners against Frank Wills for the Royals, which the Royals won 3 runs on 6 hits and no errors, to the Mariners 1 run on 7 hits and 1 error. And yes, I know my handwriting is absolutely terrible. Not likely to be a Game of the Year candidate. Then June 18th, 1985 brought us to Arlington Stadium in Arlington, Texas for a matchup between the Seattle Mariners and the Texas Rangers. And it looks like we had umpire warnings go out at some point. I forget. I think it was probably a rare play that brought warnings out. But we had Bill Wilkinson on the hill for the Mariners against Frank Tanana for the Rangers. Turns out Frank Tanana would be a Tiger later. That's why I know that name. The Rangers ended up winning that one, 6 runs on 10 hits and no errors. To the Mariners, 3 runs on 9 hits and no errors. Again, not a Game of the Year candidate. Block 20 brought us to June 22nd, 1985, and a matchup at I'm trying to remember what the stadium was in Toronto. I could go get the binder of stadiums if I wanted it, but I don't think it was, it might have been Rogers Center, come to think of it. Anyway, we were there for a matchup between the Boston Red Sox and the Toronto Blue Jays, as Al Nipper was starting for the Red Sox against Ron Musselman for the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays won this one 5-4 in walk-off fashion. Blue Jays with 5 runs on 10 hits and 1 error, and the Red Sox 4 runs on 10 hits and no errors. Usually anything that involves drama like that, looks like it was a sacrifice fly that won the game. I'll put that aside as a potential Game of the Year candidate, but I don't know if it's going to end up being the Game of the Year. Block 21 on June 26, 1985, brought us back to Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati, Ohio, for a matchup between the Cincinnati Reds and the San Francisco Giants in the NL West. One of those games in the Expos Dodgers Division Series. That's probably a place that we'll be looking for. We'll probably be looking in the playoffs, I would expect, for a Game of the Year. I've got a couple floating around in my head where they'd be good Game of the Year candidates, but we'll get to that when we get to the playoffs. So June 26, 1985, brought us back to Riverfront Stadium for the Cincinnati Reds and the San Francisco Giants. Mike Krukow, I think it's Krukow actually, for the Giants against Tom Browning for the Reds. The Reds won this one by a final score of 4 runs on 10 hits and no errors, to the Giants 2 runs on 5 hits and no errors. The AL West took center stage for June 30th, 1985 in Block 22 between the California Angels and the Kansas City Royals. We were at Kauffman Stadium, which is probably one of the more hostile hitting parks in 1985. we had Ron Romanica on the hill for the Angels against Mark Kubizka for the Royals, which the Royals won this one 7 runs on 13 hits and no errors, to the Angels 5 runs on 10 hits and 1 error. 4th of July 1985 brought a great fireworks display to Yankee Stadium as the Minnesota Twins were in town to play the New York Yankees, but the Twins played spoiler for the fireworks as they won this one by a final score of 5 runs on 13 hits and no errors to 3 runs on 8 hits and no errors for the Yankees. John Butcher was on the hill for the Twins, and Ron Guidry was on the mound for the Yankees. And I was surprised at how terrible the Yankees were on the board during this entire replay, and file that away as well, because we will come back to that idea as well. I'm just getting a writing pad because I'm going to be marking a few games in the playoffs for Game of the Year candidacy. July 8th, 1985 brought us to Block 24 and back to Cleveland Stadium for a matchup between the Cleveland Indians and the Texas Rangers. Mike Mason was on the hill for the Rangers against Neil Heaton for the Indians. The Tribe took this one by a final score of 7 runs on 13 hits and no errors to 4 runs on 10 hits and 1 error for the Rangers. We'll put that aside as not Game of the Year candidate. Then we moved to July 12th, 1985, and Wrigley Field in Block 25 for a matchup between the Chicago Cubs and the Los Angeles Dodgers. Orel Hershiser on the mound for the Dodgers against Dick Ruthven on the mound for the Cubs. This was a pretty dramatic game as well, as the Cubs won this one 5-4 in 10 innings. Cubs took this one 5 runs on 11 hits and no errors. And the Dodgers won that one 4 runs on 10 hits and 1 error. The first Montreal-Houston board game, I believe that was the Astros that won that one. That was back a ways. Block 10, here it is. The Astros won that one 2-1. And funny you bring up the Astros and Expos board games, because July 19th, 1985, I was about to say 1885 for some reason. July 19th, 1985, they were on the board again. This time we were at Olympic Stadium. And the Expos won this one 5 runs on 7 hits and no errors, to the Astros 2 runs on 4 hits and no errors. Bob Knepper for the Astros against Bryn Smith for the Expos. File that Bryn Smith name away. We will be coming back to him as well. July 23rd, 1985 brought us to Shea Stadium and Block 27 for a National League matchup between the Cincinnati Reds and the New York Mets, which the Mets won handily 7 runs on 10 hits and no errors, to the Reds 2 runs on 7 hits and 1 error. Tom Browning was on the hill starting for the Reds against Ron Darling for the Mets. I was about to say the Expos for some insane reason. Then July 27th, 1985 brought us to the Metrodome again for Block 28 and a matchup between the Detroit Tigers and the Minnesota Twins, which the Tigers won handily 10 runs on 17 hits and 2 errors, to the Twins 2 runs on 10 hits and 1 error. We probably needed the Benny Hill music for this one. Randy O'Neal was on the mound for the Tigers against John Butcher for the Twins as the starting pitchers. Actually, there were a few games that we probably needed the Benny Hill music for this one, or for that. Block 29 on July 31st, 1985 brought us to Three Rivers Stadium once again for a matchup between the Philadelphia Phillies and the Pittsburgh Pirates, which the Phillies won handily by a final score of 4 runs on 6 hits and no errors, to the Pirates 1 run on 11 hits and 1 error. Shane Raleigh was on the mound for the Phillies against Lee Tunnell for the Pirates. And once again, we see Season Ticket making a mess of history. Take a quick drink here before we continue on, because we've got a lot of baseball to get to. Block 30 brought us back to Yankee Stadium for a matchup between the Chicago White Sox and the New York Yankees. Tom Seaver, some guy you might have heard of, was on the hill for the White Sox to start against Joe Cowley for the Yankees. The Yankees actually won this game 2-0. 2 runs on 4 hits and no errors for the Yankees, to no runs, 1 hit, and 4 errors for the White Sox. Definitely a game where I needed the Benny Hill music. Block 31 brought us to August 10th, 1985 for a National League East matchup. Actually brought us to Shea Stadium for a National League East matchup between the New York Mets and the Chicago Cubs, with probably a rematch of the last time these two teams were on the board, as Ray Fontenot started for the Cubs against Dwight Gooden for the Mets. The Mets won this one 3 runs on 6 hits and 1 error, to the Cubs 1 run on 9 hits and 1 error. That was a high-scoring game historically, but season tickets said not so much. Then Block 32 on August 14th, 1985, brought us back to Dodger Stadium for a National League West matchup between the Atlanta Braves and the Los Angeles Dodgers, which the Dodgers won in a squeaker on 8 runs, 11 hits, and 1 error, to the Braves 7 runs, 10 hits, and no errors. Craig McMurtry was starting for the Braves against Bob Welch for the Dodgers. Dodgers historically won 5-0. Season ticket wanted to give us a much closer game than that. Block 33 brought us to August 18th, 1985, and Anaheim Stadium once again, as the Oakland Athletics paid the California Angels a visit. Tommy John was on the mound for the Athletics against Ron Romanick for the Angels, who I think made his at least 3rd board appearance in this replay. The Athletics, however, played spoiler, winning this one 7 runs on 12 hits and 1 error and no errors, to the Angels 5 runs, 11 hits, and 1 error. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to stop on the actual date of my birth, because that's how the blocks worked out. Block 34 brought us to August 22nd, 1985, and back to the Astrodome for the St. Louis Cardinals and the Houston Astros. We had John Tudor on the mound for the Cardinals against Joe Niekro for the Astros, which the Astros won this one 3 runs on 7 hits and no errors, and to 2 runs, 6 hits, and no errors for the Cardinals. I think this was one of the times where Jester threatened to unsubscribe from the channel, because Kevin Bass ended up hitting that clutch home run in the bottom of the 8th, which snatched victory from the jaws of defeat for the Astros. Mostly because of that late drama. I'll put that aside as well as a Game of the Year candidate, but we'll see what everybody thinks about that. Block 35 brought us back to Shea Stadium on August 26th, 1985 for a National League matchup between the New York Mets and the Los Angeles Dodgers. We had Fernando Valenzuela on the mound for the Dodgers against Ed Lynch for the Mets. The Mets won this one 2 runs on 9 hits and no errors, to the Dodgers, no runs on 3 hits and 1 error. So we're definitely getting down to the nitty-gritty of the drama. And then the last game that we picked on the 1985 feature game selection show was August 30th. Actually, it looks like this was the last game we picked for this, because you might be able to start seeing that the print style is going to look a little bit different. So we went back to Arlington Stadium as the Kansas City Royals were playing the Texas Rangers. Buddy Black was on the mound for the Royals, and Charlie Huff was on the mound for the Rangers. And I think this was the one. Yeah, this looks like the game where I actually had to invoke a mercy rule, as the Royals won this one 14 runs on 18 hits and no errors, to the Rangers 2 runs on 8 hits and no errors. So yeah, definitely had to invoke a mercy rule on. I think this was having to invoke the mercy rule. But that was by far the most lopsided margin in the replay. And then, yep, you can see the print. You might be able to see the print style at a distance starting to change. Let me see if I can. Well, I'm not going to zoom it in too much. But the reason the print style is going to change here is because if you remember back to the 1985 feature game selection show, I said I was going to stop at the end of August for that replay, and I was going to start picking September games on the fly, because I really wanted to hone in and focus on the pennant races. So that's where the bad teams started to drop off, and their board appearances started to become very, very limited. So September 3rd, 1985 was the first game we picked on the fly for Block 37. We went back to Tiger Stadium for the California Angels and the Detroit Tigers. Kirk McCaskill was on the mound for the Angels against Dan Petrie for the Tigers. The Tigers won this one handily, 7 runs on 11 hits and no errors, to the Angels 1 run on 2 hits and no errors. The Angels just couldn't get out of their own way. And also, file away the Angels and the Tigers. We're coming back to that series as well a little bit later on. Block 38 brought us to September 7th, 1985, for a National League matchup between the New York Mets and the Los Angeles Dodgers. We had Ed Lynch on the mound for the Mets against Jerry Royce for the Dodgers. The Dodgers won this one handily, 6 runs on 13 hits and no errors, to the Mets 2 runs on 6 hits and 1 error. So Dodger Stadium was pretty happy that night. Dodgers historically won that one 7-6. Season ticket wanted to give us a blowout. And then we spent a lot of time toward the end of the replay in the American League East, as we went back up north of the border to Rogers Center for a matchup between the Detroit Tigers and the Toronto Blue Jays, which the Tigers were being clutch for this one. They had Jack Morris on the hill for the Tigers, which probably helped, against Doyle Alexander for the Blue Jays. The Tigers won this one, 6 runs on 10 hits and no errors, to the Blue Jays 5 runs, 7 hits and no errors. And the Angels and the Tigers, yes, was the eventual ALCS. Then September 14th, 1985, brought us back north of the border once again. Actually, I think we stayed north of the border, but we moved over to Quebec as the Montreal we moved over to Quebec and Olympic Stadium as the Montreal Expos hosted the New York Mets. Sid Fernandez was on the mound for the Mets against David Palmer for the Expos. The Mets came in and slapped the Expos around, 6 runs on 11 hits and 1 error. To the Expos, 2 runs, 4 hits, and no errors. Mets and Expos is eventually a matchup we're going to come back to as well. Block 41 brought us back to Dodger Stadium once again as the Houston Astros went to town to visit the Los Angeles Dodgers. Mike Scott was starting for the Astros against Rick Honeycutt for the Dodgers. The Dodgers won this one, 4 runs on 12 hits and no errors, to the Astros 1 run, 5 hits, and 1 error. Not a handily close game, so season ticket flipped both the outcome and the score. Block 42 brought us to Memorial Stadium in Baltimore. I mentioned spending a lot of time in the American League East. And the New York Yankees took center stage once again against the Baltimore Orioles. And the Yankees proceeded to lay an egg with Ron Guidry on the mound for the Yankees against Ken Dixon for the Orioles. The Orioles won this game, 7 runs on 11 hits and no errors, to the Yankees 2 runs on 3 hits and no errors. As I mentioned, we spent a lot of time in the American League East because it was basically the Yankees and it was a 3-team race after that, but we'll talk more about that as we get into the end of the regular season. Block 43 brought us back north of the border to Rogers Center once again on September 26th, 1985, as the Toronto Blue Jays had to come in clutch once again against the Boston Red Sox. The Red Sox were still kind of hanging around at this point, but they were basically out of it. Jeff Sellers was starting for the Red Sox against Doyle Alexander for the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays ended up winning this one, 7 runs on 11 hits and no errors, to the Red Sox 6 runs on 12 hits and 1 error. Toronto had to win this one in walk-off fashion, though. So maybe another one for Game of the Year on drama alone. And somehow I forgot to note that this one was Block 44. This next game on the board, Block 44, September 30th, 1985 at Kauffman Stadium, wasn't quite a game for the AL West crown, but it could have been very easily. Fortunately for the California Angels, though, it was not a game for the AL West crown. They were playing the Kansas City Royals at Kauffman Stadium. The Royals won this one, 7 runs, 6 hits, and no errors. To the Angels, no runs, 3 hits, and 3 errors. Another one where we needed the Benny Hill music. John Candelario was up for the Angels against Brett Saberhagen for the Royals. And then Block 45 was all but, I'm going to get that out of my way because that's not something I need here. Block 45 was all but an honorary playoff game the way things were going in the American League East. The Detroit Tigers were at Memorial Stadium to play the Baltimore Orioles. Tigers had one objective in this game: win and in, and they won with Dan Petrie on the mound against Scott McGregor for the Orioles. 3 runs on 7 hits and 1 error. To the Orioles, no runs, 5 hits and no errors. That last board game ended up costing the Orioles the playoffs, as we'll see when we get to the 1985 standings. So the way things finished out in the American League East, the Yankees ended up running away with the division and the number 1 seed overall. 108 wins, 53 losses, and I didn't pull the board records on that, but those didn't end up being relevant for any of our tiebreakers. Then the Blue Jays made the playoffs as the 3 seed. The Tigers were the 5 seed. They won and they managed to get in. As for the AL West, the California Angels squeaked that out by a single game over the Royals. So that last board game between the Angels and the Royals was not an AL West title game, but it very easily could have been. That one extra win for the Angels gave them the 2 seed and sent the Royals to host the wild card game. As for the NL East, the St. Louis Cardinals won the division running away at 102 and 60. Then the Mets were the 4 seed at 92 and 70. The Montreal Expos kind of backdoored into the playoffs a little bit at a record of 83 and 78. And remember, going back to the AL West, on the channel, for the baseball replays at least, teams have to have a winning record to get in, or the playoffs are modified, as we'll see happen in the American League. We just finished talking about the National League. The Cardinals won the division. Mets and the Expos also made the playoffs. In the National League West, we see the Los Angeles Dodgers won that division, even though they were in a fight with the Astros for most of the way. They ended up winning the division by 9 games over the Astros. The Astros ended up being the 3 seed, which of course means you skip the wild card round. And the Reds got in as the 5 seed, but that meant they had to play the wild card round. So you're going to see everything written out, but the typewritten stuff is where we ended up going into the playoffs. So we ended up with 1 wild card game in the American League, which turned out to be a rematch of the 1991 wild card game, except the host stadium was flipped. The Detroit Tigers were hosting in 1991 and lost to the Kansas City Royals. This time we were at Kauffman Stadium for the wild card game. But of course, in the National League, we had 2 wild card games. The Montreal Expos of the 6th seed had to play the Cincinnati Reds in the first wild card game in the National League, and then the winner went to play the New York Mets at Shea Stadium, which was not a place I think either team wanted to be. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this retrospective on the 1985 season. But now we start to take a look at the playoffs. And we started off right. Oh, I see what happened. I had an extra lineup in here because I tried to set the game up the night before, and then when I went to pull everything in Digital Diamond, I was like, oh, something's not right. So I had to use different lineups. But anyway, we then had our first wild card game, which was the National League wild card game between the Montreal Expos and the Cincinnati Reds. I think Bryn Smith was the starter against whoever the number 1 starter was for the Reds. I think here is about where I started to remember, hey, I should probably keep note of the starting pitchers. But Bryn Smith, again, was the starting pitcher. The Expos won the first wild card game by a final score of 6-3. It was 6-0 going into the bottom of the 8th, but the Expos surrendered 3 runs in essentially garbage time. Not really a lot of drama there. As for the wild card game in the American League, there was definitely a lot of drama in this one, as the Detroit Tigers were at Kauffman Stadium to play the Kansas City Royals. Again, there was the revenge storyline from 1991, and that's why I put umpire warnings in to start the game. And it turns out in the wild card game for the American League, both starters actually ended up getting tossed due to beaning batters. So Jack Morris got run out, as did Brett Saberhagen. But the Tigers did end up getting their revenge for 1991. 10 runs on 11 hits and 1 error, to the Royals 4 runs, 9 hits, and 1 error. Box score for the first wild card game, was the Expos 6 runs, 10 hits, and 1 error. To the Reds, 3 runs, 7 hits, and 1 error as well. But the Montreal Expos were not done in the wild card round yet because they had to go play at Shea Stadium, play the New York Mets. And this ended up being a nail-biter of a game. The Mets went into the 8th inning leading 2-1. And then the Expos pulled out a 2-run 8th with Bill Gullickson starting on the mound against Dwight Gooden for the Mets. The Expos ended up winning this game 3 runs on 8 hits and 1 error to 2 runs, 8 hits, and 1 error for the Mets. So the Expos snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, eliminating the Mets and probably making RJL cry. I know he's a big Mets fan. Anyway, after that, we moved into the division series round with the Houston Astros and the St. Louis Cardinals at Busch Stadium for Game 1. Nolan Ryan was on the mound for the Astros against Joaquin Andujar for the Cardinals. The Astros won this one, 4 runs, 11 hits, and 1 error. To the Cardinals, 3 runs, 5 hits, and no errors. Definitely had some drama in it, but not a Game of the Year candidate, I don't think. As for the ALDS, actually we moved to the League Division Series round. As for the League Division Series, we moved over to Anaheim Stadium as the Toronto Blue Jays took on the California Angels in their Game 1, with Dave Stieb on the mound for the Blue Jays against Mike Witt for the Angels. The Blue Jays ended up winning this one, 9 runs, 14 hits, and no errors. To the Angels, 4 runs, 5 hits, and no errors. And at that point, the Blue Jays looked unstoppable, but as we'll see later on in the series, not so much. Then the Montreal Expos took center stage, and their prize was to go to Los Angeles and play the Dodgers in Game 1 of their division series. They had, who did they have? Dan Schatzeder was the starter for the Expos against Oral Hershiser for the Dodgers. The Dodgers pulled out Game 1, 5 runs on 10 hits and 2 errors. To the Expos, 3 runs, 6 hits, and 1 error. I'm not voting for this one as a potential Game of the Year candidate, even though the Expos did show a little spark of defiance in the top of the 9th because they went into that inning trailing 5-1. But those 2 runs were a clear sign that, hey, we're not completely dead yet. Speaking of not completely dead yet, the other American League Division Series started at Yankee Stadium with Game 1 between the Detroit Tigers and the New York Yankees. It was Dan Petrie for the Tigers against Ron Guidry for the Yankees. I didn't note him in the pitcher section, but Ron Guidry was the starter as he was the ace for the Yankees. The Tigers actually controlled this game 3-0. The Tigers actually led this game 3-0 going into the bottom of the 9th. But the Yankees managed to get they led 3-1 going into the bottom of the 9th. But they managed to get 3 runs off of Willie Hernandez to take Game 1, 4 runs on 11 hits and no errors. To the Tigers, 3 runs, 10 hits, and no errors. That one had a lot of drama to it, so I'm going to mark that one as another potential Game of the Year candidate. Got my pen right here. It would help if I could spell candidates right. Okay. So yeah, I've noted that one as a potential Game of the Year candidate. Then in Game 2 of the National League Division Series between the Houston Astros and the St. Louis Cardinals, we had Mike Scott on the mound for the Astros against John Tudor for the Cardinals. Turns out we didn't know it then. Well, I think we kind of suspected going into Game 2. We were wondering if the Cardinals would get this one even. The Cardinals actually led this one 3-0 going into the top of the 7th. Then they proceeded to have a 9-run meltdown and probably send Jester into conniptions as he watched the bullpen just turn for the Cardinals. They couldn't get anybody out in the top of the 7th. But the Astros ended up winning that game 10 runs, 13 hits, and 2 errors to 5 runs, 12 hits, and no errors for the Cardinals. So yeah, that probably set Jester off more than a little bit. Then Game 2 of the American League Division Series. Yes, Detroit would fire back, and you're getting ahead of me a little bit, Philip, but We'll come back to that, not to worry. Game 2 of the division series between the Toronto Blue Jays and the California Angels at Anaheim Stadium once again. California came into this one needing to make a statement, and they managed to, as they won this one, beating, Doyle Alexander with Ron Romanek on the mound. 3 runs, 10 hits, and no errors, to 2 runs, 6 hits, and no errors for the Blue Jays. We will come back to Toronto and California later on because we are far from done with them. As for Game 2, the Montreal Expos were back to Dodger Stadium with now getting Bryn Smith back on the mound against Fernando Valenzuela for the Dodgers. The Expos would turn out to be equal to the challenge, winning this one 2 runs, 5 hits, and 2 errors to 1 run, 4 hits, and 1 error for the Dodgers, but it took the Expos 10 innings to get it done. This one I'm definitely marking as a Game of the Year candidate as well. We've got some good games for Game of the Year. Then in Game 2, as Philip alluded to, the Tigers did indeed fire back with Walt Terrell on the mound against Phil Niekro for the Yankees. The Tigers, I think something in them woke up and as they went back to Yankee Stadium and tied the series 9 runs on 8 hits and 1 error to 3 runs, 5 hits, and 2 errors for the Yankees. Weird that there seems like there were a lot of errors on the board in this replay. But that would end up with that series tied at 1. I think every division series... Right. At this point, every division series except for the Astros and the Cardinals was tied at 1. The Astros were up 2-0 on the Cardinals. Game 3 would be the last time we would see the Cardinals on center stage in this replay. As we had Danny Cox on the mound for the Cardinals against Bob Knepper for the Astros. We were at the Astrodome now, and the Astrodome turned out to be the grave for the Cardinals' season, as the Astros won that one 7 runs, 12 hits, and no errors, to 6 runs, 13 hits, and 1 error for the Cardinals. And with that, the Astros were swept out, or the Astros swept the Cardinals out of the playoffs and looked unstoppable heading into the NLCS. But as we'll see, let's see what happens. Game 3 of the division series between the California Angels and the Toronto Blue Jays, as that series shifted north of the border. The Angels won that one with Don Smith on the mound for the Angels against Jimmy Key for the Blue Jays. Jimmy Key picked a very bad night to lay an egg, as the Angels won this one 9 runs, 15 hits, and 1 error to 3 runs, 10 hits, and 2 errors for the Blue Jays. So California led the series 2-1 at this point. Then as the NLDS between the Expos and the Dodgers also shifted north of the border, we had Bob Welch on the mound for the Dodgers against Bill Gullickson for the Expos. Los Angeles went into the bottom of the ninth, leading 8-6. Actually, they went in leading 8-7. This ended up being a very high drama game. There were several lead changes as the Dodgers got out of the third leading 4-0. Then by the 6th, the Expos were leading 6-4. Then it was 7-5 heading into the ninth. And then the Dodgers scored 3 runs to take the lead 8-7. And then the Expos pulled it off 9-8 to win this one. 9 runs, 11 hits, and 3 errors to the Dodgers' 8 runs, 12 hits, and no errors. This is another Game of the Year candidate. This Expos Dodgers series, I'll tell you what, this was some amazing baseball by itself. And I doubt Philip will argue with me on that point. This was some amazing baseball. But that would give the Expos a 2-1 series lead. Game 3 of the American League Division Series between the Yankees and the Tigers shifted over to Tiger Stadium as Joe Cowley was starting for the Tigers against Frank Tanana for the Tigers. And I will mark that as your potential pick. That is definitely a hell of a candidate for Game of the Year. This one, however, not so much, as the Tigers won this one by a final score of 7 runs, 7 hits, and no errors, to the Yankees 4 runs, 4 hits, and no errors. That would give the Tigers a 2-1 series lead. Then as we went back north of the border once again, the Toronto Blue Jays came into this one facing a do-or-die situation against the California Angels. And they got this one in walk-off fashion as they went into the bottom of the 9th, tied at 2. But the Blue Jays picked up 2 runs in the bottom of the 9th to win this one walk-off. 4 runs, 8 hits, and 1 error to 2 runs, 4 hits, and 1 error for the Angels. That would end up with that series tied at 2 games apiece. And we would have history on the channel as we would have our first ever playoff series to go the distance. As for the National League Division Series, also north of the border, the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Montreal Expos, with Orel Hershiser demanding the baseball to try to get this series back to Dodger Stadium for Game 5. The Expos made a very daring move in this game, going to Bryn Smith to start the game on short rest and try to finish the series in Los Angeles. Turns out the Expos would succeed in that goal, but they had a little bit of help, as Montreal won this one 8 runs, 11 hits, and no errors, to 2 runs, 8 hits, and 3 errors by the Dodgers. All of 3 errors were by Mariano Duncan, and ChatGPT and I have had a lot of fun with that and some of the things that Tommy Lasorda did to Mariano Duncan coming out of that. One of the ideas was shipping him to AAA. Another one was, what was another one? Just mentally breaking him. And then a third was trading Duncan up to Montreal for a case of Molson and a bucket of baseballs. So yeah, ChatGPT and I had a lot of fun savaging the Dodgers after Duncan committed those 3 errors in Game 4. Speaking of Game 4s that saw a series end, this was another one that saw a series end, as Ron Guidry tried to get this series back to New York for Game 5. Jack Morris for the Tigers said, no, that's not happening. The Tigers won this one 5 runs on 8 hits and 1 error, to the Yankees 2 runs, 9 hits, and 1 error. So the Tigers advanced to the ALCS by a final to play the winner of the California-Toronto series. The NLCS was set by the Expos advancing. They were playing the Astros. And the historical first on the channel was a playoff series going the distance, going to Game 7. The Blue Jays had it in the palm of their hand going into the top of the 8th as they led 6-3, but the Angels are 6-4. There should have been another run there. Oh, wait. Actually, the Angels were leading this one 7-3. Never mind. But they almost gave it away going into the top of the 9th. Or top of the 8th, I should say. The Blue Jays managed to get 3 runs in the top of the 8th and almost came all the way back. But the Angels managed to win this one on a ground ball by Reggie Jackson. The Angels won Game 5 of the ALDS. 7 runs, 14 hits, and no errors, to 6 runs, 11 hits, and 1 error for the Blue Jays. And that's actually Bryn Smith. Philip, I'll type in the correct spelling. Bryn Smith was absolutely phenomenal in this series. So it was Bryn Smith, not Brent Smith. I know I'm not saying it, I'm probably not saying it clearly, but I am trying to say Bryn Smith like that. It's not Brent Smith. So yeah, file Bryn Smith away. We are coming back to him later. We are going to be hearing a lot about him going deeper into the playoffs. With that, we had both of our league championship series set as the California Angels. Yep, Bryn Smith like that. So now we had both of our league championship series set as the Houston Astros were playing the Montreal Expos. The Astros would have home field advantage for that one. The California Angels would have home field advantage against the Detroit Tigers in the ALCS. In the National League Championship Series, Game 1 featured Bryn Smith against Nolan Ryan. Smith won, actually, the Astros won this one by a final score. They needed a walk-off to win this one. 5 runs on 11 hits and 1 error for the Astros, to 4 runs on 7 hits and 1 error for the Expos. And if you want my vote for most impactful game of the replay, not necessarily game of the year, this is my vote for most impactful game in the replay. Because in the third inning of game 1, do I have it noted here? Yes. In game 1, with 2 outs in the top of the third inning, there was actually a rare play collision, and it might be a little bit hard to see, but I do have a note here. Let me bring this in so you can see. Normally what I do on my score sheets is when a new pitcher comes in, I'll put initials in because I also want to know when a pitcher starts so I can track their fatigue. But what happened in the top of the third, there was a collision as one of the fielders, I think looks like it was Mitch Webster, rushed in. Nolan Ryan made the play, but there was a collision, and Nolan Ryan ended up leaving the game early with injured ribs. File that away for the time being as well. That is something else we're going to come back to, and you'll understand why eventually this would get my vote as most impactful game in the replay, not necessarily game of the year. So with the Astros win, they led the series 1-0. Speaking of game 1, the California Angels were at home at Anaheim Stadium to start the championship series against the Detroit Tigers. Jack Morris was on the mound for the Tigers against Mike Witt for the Angels. And this was not a close game at all. The Angels won this one handily. 7 runs, 9 hits, and 1 error to 1 run, 4 hits, and 1 error for the Tigers. So the Angels led the series 1-0. Then in game 2, something woke up in the Expos as they pounced on the Houston Astros with Bill Gullickson on the mound for the Expos against Mike Scott for the Astros. The Expos won this one handily, 7 runs on 12 hits and 1 error to 1 run, 7 hits, and no errors for the Astros. So that tied the NLCS at 1 game apiece. As for the American League, Dan Petrie was on the hill for the Tigers against Ron Romanick for the Angels. The Tigers came back knowing this was a game they had to win, scoring the only 2 runs of the game in the 4th inning. Winning this one, 2 runs, 7 hits, and no errors, to no runs, 8 hits, and no errors for the Angels. That would tie the ALCS at a game apiece. Game 3 of the NLCS moved north of the border to Olympic Stadium between the Expos and the Astros. Bob Knepper was starting for the Astros against Dan Schatzeder for the Expos. The Expos took advantage of a 5-run third inning to win Game 3, 6 runs, 15 hits, and 2 errors to 4 runs, 8 hits, and 1 error for the Astros, and take a 2-1 series lead. And seriously, what is it with these teams and being on the board that they got a lot of errors in 1985? It's almost like they had performance anxiety or something. Speaking of Game 3 and series shifting, the Detroit Tigers now got home field advantage for their American League Championship Series against the California Angels. Don Sutton starting for the Angels against Walt Terrell for the Tigers. And the Tigers took advantage of home cooking to win this game 6 runs, 8 hits, and no errors to 2 runs, 6 hits, and 2 errors for the Angels. The Tigers took a 2-1 series lead on that note. Then Game 4 of the National League Championship Series. Remember when I told you to file away Nolan Ryan's ribs? Here's where we came back to that, because I actually used a house rule. I actually built up a house rule to bring in Nolan Ryan's ribs. Basically, the crux is I rolled an extra die on his pitches and when he was pitching and when he was batting. If it was 1 to 3, his ribs didn't affect the at bat. 4 to 6, they did affect him. It would be a +5 to the roll if he was pitching, or a -5 if he was hitting. Turns out Ryan hit his fatigue via his ribs in the 3rd inning. So in an eventual Game 7, his ribs would come back into play again. But the Expos, looking at the score of this one, did not look like they were going to let this series back out of Montreal. 7 runs, 11 hits, and 2 errors to no runs, 3 hits, and 1 error for the Astros. The Expos took a 3-1 series lead on that note. As for Game 4, the Angels knew they had to win this one at Tiger Stadium. They had their ace on the mound in Mike Witt versus the Tigers having their ace on the mound in Jack Morris. The Angels needed this game And they got it. 3 runs on 7 hits and 1 error to 2 runs, 7 hits, and 2 errors for the Tigers. That tied the ALCS at 2 games apiece. And we're headed for more history on the channel in this replay. As for Game 5, we had probably the most runs that were scored in a game on the board, as the Expos managed to finish off the Astros with Mike Scott on the mound for the Astros against Bill Gullickson for the Expos. 13 runs, 19 hits, and 3 errors for the Expos to 9 runs, 13 hits, and no errors for the Astros. So the Expos celebrated with their dog pile as they made the 1985 World Series, winning the NLCS by a final score of 4-1. But of course, we still had some business to attend to, as we still needed the American League Championship Series to wrap up. That series was tied at 2 going into Game 5. The Tigers once again took advantage of home cooking to get this one, with Ron Romanick on the mound for the Angels against Dan Petrie for the Tigers. 4 runs, 11 hits, and no errors to 2 runs, 3 hits, and no errors for the Tigers, or for the Angels. So the Tigers took a 3-2 series lead. Going back to California, would they wake up? And it was sputtering, but the Angels got there with the only 2 runs coming in the bottom of the 6th, with Walt Terrell on the mound for the Tigers against Don Sutton for the Angels. 2 runs, 4 hits, and 2 errors for the Angels to no runs, 5 hits, and 1 error for the Tigers. And we had history. We had our first ever Game 7 during a replay between the Tigers and the Angels. And boy, was it a dramatic one. Tied at 1 going into the bottom of the 9th. 2 outs and a range play and a deep drive by, who was it? A deep drive by Rupert Jones very nearly sent the Angels to the World Series. That was actually hit to Kirk Gibson, and I remember Ben Witz in chat in that game panicking because he was like, But it turns out that Gibson was able to make the catch on that one, get the Tigers out of that trouble, and then the Tigers took advantage of the lease on life as they picked up 2 runs in the top of the 10th to win the. I realized I flipped the final scores. So the score is right, I just had the wrong team with it in the final line score. So the Tigers won our first ever Game 7 on the channel. 3 runs, 8 hits, and 1 error to 1 run, 5 hits, and no errors for the Angels. This is actually probably another pretty good candidate for Game of the Year. So we'll write that one in as well as a potential Game of the Year candidate. So now we've got our World Series set, and because of how I do my demo games, we also had our demo game set for the next baseball replay, which may be summer 2025, but we'll find that out later. Before we do that, though, we had the summer 2025 project selection show. The 4 seasons for that. There's still a little bit more time to vote if you haven't yet. But the projects that came out of that were 1972 in football. That would be 5D20 only. A heavyweight tournament and title bout 2. Heavyweight boxing tournament and title bout 2. 2009-10 hockey season. That'll be a combined replay between Stratomatic hockey and inside the crease hockey. And 1971. That'll take us back to season ticket baseball once again. But once we had the project set, we had the 1985 World Series to turn to. We started at Tiger Stadium as the Tigers had home field advantage for that one. The Tigers actually drew first blood with, it was Bryn Smith on the mound for the Expos against Jack Morris for the Tigers. But the Expos would draw first blood in Detroit. 5 runs, 7 hits, and 1 error to 2 runs, 6 hits, and no errors for the Tigers. That would give the Expos the series lead for a game apiece, or for a game. Then the Montreal Expos came out with a 5-run 6th and took a 2-0 lead with Bill Gullickson on the mound against Dan Petrie for the Tigers. 5 runs, 9 hits, and no errors for the Expos to no runs, 11 hits, and 1 error for the Tigers. That would give Montreal a 2-0 series And at this point, ChatGPT and I kind of figured the series was over because we were heading to Olympic Stadium, a place where the Expos had yet to lose in the playoffs in this replay. Because they'd beaten the Dodgers 3 times, actually twice in the League Division Series, and then all 3 games against the Astros in the League Championship Series. So the Expos were very much heading into friendly territory, but the Tigers said, not so fast, guys, we're not dead yet. Walt Terrell was on the mound for the Tigers against Dan Schatzeder for the Expos. The Tigers would actually take this one using a 4-run fourth, winning this one 6 runs on 8 hits and no errors to 3 runs on 7 hits and 1 error for the Expos. And the Tigers did something nobody else had been able to do in the playoffs to that point, and that was beat the Montreal Expos at Olympic Stadium. But obviously that lit a fire under the Expos, because in Game 4, they came back and just slapped the Tigers around with a 5-run third to win Game 4. The Expos came out of Game 3 with a 2-1 series lead, by the way. The Expos came out of Game 4 and won that one 6 runs, 6 hits, and no errors to 1 run, 5 hits, and 1 error for the Tigers. The 1 run coming in the top of the 9th on garbage time. Let's be perfectly honest about that. So the Tigers at this point were on their deathbeds, and there was definitely going to be no fear if we got to Game 7 and Bryn Smith was starting once again for the 3rd time in the series against Jack Morris, as the Expos had beaten Jack Morris twice already. But as it turned out, we wouldn't need to worry about Game 7 anymore, because in Game 5, the Montreal Expos would get 3 runs in the 4th, then 2 in the 5th, and they got 1 more run somewhere. Let me see where the extra run came from. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It looks like it was in the 7th where the Expos got 1 more run. I was just trying to figure out where that was. That turned out to be an insurance run, as Dan Petry was starting for the Tigers against Bill Gullickson for the Expos. But the Expos won Game 5 by a final score of 6 runs, 8 hits, and no errors to 3 runs, 10 hits on no errors for the Detroit Tigers. And that sent Olympic Stadium into a frenzy, to put it mildly. Bryn Smith ended up being the World Series MVP, being the architect of 2 losses, or being the architect of 2 huge wins in the World Series. And if I was tracking a World Series MVP, or a whole playoffs MVP, odds are Bryn Smith would probably win that one running away as well. Especially coming in Game 4 to finish off the Dodgers, and then basically being there when it was all down to it. So, now we have one last order of business, and we can close the book on 1985. So, our 8 candidates for Game of the Year, and there were some good ones here. So let's look at what we've got. We've got the May 1st, 1985 game between the Milwaukee Brewers and the Oakland Athletics, which I think was the first time a home team won in walk-off fashion. Then we've got the game, again, walk-off drama between the Boston Red Sox and the Toronto Blue Jays. That one, I'm kind of saying no. That one's not really a good Game of the Year candidate, so I'm going to take that one out of the running. I think that was one I had chipped in. So 22, 21, we'll put that back in the stack. Let's see. Next up we had more drama between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Houston Astros. So this one was the one where Kevin Bass snatched victory from the jaws of defeat for the Astros. This was August 22nd, 1985. I think the reason I considered this one is because that to me at least kind of marked a little bit of a turning point for the Astros, where it was clear at that point that the Astros were going to get forced to be reckoned with. Then the last game of the regular season was more walk-off drama between the Red Sox and the Blue Jays. I'm going to take this one out as well. I'm kind of surprised Jester isn't here yet to weigh in on our Game of the Year candidates. Just going to check on a few things here. Okay. And then we had 4 playoff games up as Game of the Year candidates. Our first Game of the Year candidate, in case you'd like to refresh your memory, was Game 1 of the American League Division Series, where the Yankees managed to have their own snatch victory from the jaws of defeat moment, scoring 3 runs in a highly dramatic bottom of the 9th inning. As I didn't realize this, but apparently the Tigers were 1 out away from winning that Game 1. Then we had which one was it? Game 2 of the National League Division Series between the Expos and the Dodgers, which was a very high drama game where the Expos won that one 2-1 in extras. Then our next candidate was Game 3 of the same series, where the Expos won that one, where there were 3 lead changes in this game, but the Expos won this one using a highly dramatic bottom of the 9th. And then just for the historical factor, and also with its own drama, with its own high drama, the last candidate that I came up with for Game of the Year was Game 7 of the ALCS between Detroit and California, where we had a ninth inning, a bottom of the 9th deep drive that Gibson was able to make the catch on, and then the Tigers pulled that one off. So I don't know what you're thinking, Philip, but as far as what my vote's going to be for, I'm thinking Game of the Year is either going to be Game 3 of the NLDS between the Dodgers and the Expos, or Game 7 of the ALCS between the Tigers and the Angels. Which one do you think? Which means the Game of the Year will probably be out of this book. I'm open to it being one of the regular season games as well, but I think those two in the playoffs are probably going to be the game. One of those is going to be the Game of the Year, I think. You think Game 3 of the NLDS? Okay. I was hoping Jester would be here so we wouldn't have it. That is a very worthy candidate. He'll probably weigh in on his own in the comments later, but I think I'm going to agree with you on that one. It's going to be a very close vote, but winning Game of the Year honors for 1985 will be Game 3 of the National League Division Series between the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Montreal Expos. That whole series really had a lot of excellent baseball, and Troy's voting for Tigers Angels, as Troy Sawyer now joins us here for the 1985 season recap and reveal show. Troy, I probably mentioned this at the top. I don't know if you were here for that, but given that Philip's been here a lot of the way, it's like I said, it's going to be a very close vote to the point where I don't like having co-games of the year, but I think if Jester were here and he said Game 7 of the ALCS, I probably would say, yeah, co-games of the year. And actually, I think I am going to. I know it's a cop-out, but those two were probably two of the best games in this entire replay. So we are going to say co-games of the year, because those two had everything I would want out of a Game of the Year candidate. High impact, high drama, and just overall exciting to play. So the co-games of the year are Game 3 of the National League Division Series between the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Montreal Expos, and Game 7 of the American League Championship Series between the Detroit Tigers and the California Angels. And with that, we are officially closing the book on 1985. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the 1985 season replay, as it's been an amazing ride. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun replaying my birth year. And Philip agrees with co-games of the year. So that crosses my birth year off the list of seasons that I need to replay. So now 1985 is never going to be replayed again. That was block 34. So let's pull that. There we are. Okay. So, now that we know now that we know 1985 is done, let's find out what's coming next. So, now we have the reveal portion of the show. And Philip, Troy, since you guys are here, I'm curious to know what you guys voted on for the next project that you want to see. We'll find out what it's going to be. I'm just waiting for YouTube to come up here so I can get the poll, so I can get the final vote on the poll. And thank you guys. Thank you not just to Philip and Troy, but to everybody who voted for what they want the next project to be on the channel. So I'm just waiting. I'm just gonna get a few things set up here. I'm gonna get a few things set up here while I wait for YouTube to pop up. We'll bring the dice tower front and center. We're setting this up, so as of this point, okay, Philip voted for 1971 season ticket. Okay, cool. So as of this point, Troy, once you confirm if you voted or not, I am going to close the poll. But if you haven't voted yet, I will give you a minute to go vote in the poll on my community tab on my channel. So I'm just waiting for it to pull up. I'm just waiting for YouTube to pull up and give me the poll results. Okay. So the way we're going to do this is I've got the four projects. I've got the results of the poll listed in the. I've got the results of the poll listed. So the way you guys are going to help impact the project and the number of dice is the fourth place project is going to roll 2 dice. Then the next one's going to roll 3, then 4, then 5. It's going to be a King of the Hill style tournament where we're going to take the number of dice each project gets to roll. We'll roll them into the tower. Then I'll take the lowest die away from the higher seeded project, and we'll compare the results. Whichever one gets a higher result will win that round of the roll. It'll be a best 4 of 7 gauntlet. So whichever project wins there, they will advance to the next project, and so on until we have all 4 projects come up. And then whichever project is the last one standing will be the summer project, and Troy voted for boxing. Okay, so at this point, the poll is officially closed. Coming in 4th place in the poll and rolling 2 dice is going to be the 1972 season in football. This would be a 5d20 football only replay. I have replayed 1972 in Momentum Football, so we're going to add in some stakes as well there, where if 1972 doesn't win the vote this time, I'm going to retire it completely from replays. You may still see it when I need to do ticker testing or knock some rust off, anything like that, but otherwise, if 1972 doesn't advance to be the summer project this year, then you're never going to see it on the channel again. Just taking a quick drink here. And coming in 3rd place in the poll and rolling 3 dice is going to be the heavyweight boxing tournament in Title Bout 2. It will be rolling 3 blue dice. So we've got the dice there. I'll do a practice roll because it might make more sense on how I'm doing this if I do a practice roll to explain this. And it'll be the same for each season moving forward. So you put the roll in. Remember, this one's a demo roll. This one doesn't count. This is a roll I'm doing to explain how this is going to work here. Okay, so actually this is a bit of a bad example. Let me do another roll here since we're going to end up tied. I want to try to get a roll where one of the seasons wins so I can explain it. Okay, here we go. So we take away the lowest die from boxing in this case, which means we take the 1 away, then we total up the dice that remain. So a 10 for boxing to an 11 for football, which means 1972 would actually get the win on that roll. So does that all make sense? I'll wait for confirmation before we go ahead with the actual roll. I was just thinking after the game I played this morning where I used the purple dice, maybe the purple dice were broken and 1972 would be rethinking what they wanted to roll. But looking at that demo roll, 1972 might be perfectly happy with that. So it'll make sense to Philip. So since it seems fairly straightforward, now we start getting into rolls that do count. So now this one actually counts. Okay, taking away the 2 from boxing, we see boxcars for boxing to 8 for football. So that's a win. So that's a win for the heavyweight boxing tournament. And it's a race to 4. Also makes sense to Troy. Good to know. So round 2 of the roll. Let's get that one in the tower, but I don't think it's going to matter. So we take away one of the 5s. We've got an 11 for boxing to a 5 for football. That's another win for boxing. And one thing I was surprised about is that boxing actually was second place in the poll for quite a while. And then I'm even more surprised at the sport that overtook it. So now round 3. 1972's got to get its act together here. All right, so we take away the 3 once again. We end up with a 10 for boxing to 6 for football. So boxing now has a 3-0 lead, which means 1972 has now got to run the table, or else it'll never be considered as a project again. And that's a cocked die, but I think football's fate is pretty much sealed at this point. So we take away the 1, a 7 to boxing, 2, that was a 5. It flipped on me. But that's a 5 for football, which means boxing wins the first round. 4-0, and 1972 is now officially being retired from the pool of seasons. And indeed, football wanted to rethink the seasons, or probably wanted to rethink the dice. There we go. I was having problems opening my season bag. All right, so now we'll reset boxing to 4, and it will advance to face the next season. Coming in second place in the vote and rolling 4 dice is the 2009-10 season of hockey. Given that's going to be a combined replay between Stratomatic and Inside the Crease hockey, we'll talk a little bit more about how the logistics are going to work out for that if hockey wins. In more immediate concerns, though, hockey will be rolling 4 orange dice. So now hockey is the project that we're taking dice away from. Is now the project that we're going to be taking a die away from. Round 1, boxing versus hockey. Taking away the 1, and wow, I was about to say Hoxing. Raiders were a good momentum champion. Yes, indeed, they were. In more immediate concerns, we've got a 6 for boxing to a 12 for hockey, so hockey gets the first win. Round 2 coming up. We take away the 1, and we've got a 17 for boxing to a 12 for hockey. Boxing is obviously not going to go away without a fight here, because that's a win for boxing. Round 3 as we're tied at 1. Taking away a 1 from hockey, we end up with a 10 for hockey to 8 for boxing, which means hockey will take another win. 2-1 hockey. This will be the first year I've got the full format up for this replay project, where the winter season is an executive pick, meaning I pick, and the summer project you guys help pick, and then the dice ultimately decide. We'll see how I like this structure, but in theory it should be a good structure because you guys get a voice in the projects coming up, but I have a way to introduce rotation if I need to. So let's see what we get for round 3 here between hockey and boxing. We take away a 3, and we see an 8 for boxing to a 16 for hockey. So hockey now has a 3-1 lead on boxing. Now boxing's got to get it together, or the heavyweight tournament in Title Bout 2 will go back into the dice pool, into the season pool. So let's see if hockey can win it here, or if boxing can start to march back. Taking away a 2, we see a 10 for boxing to 9, 10, 11 for hockey, which means 2009-10 hockey wins that round by a final score of 4-1. So now the heavyweight tournament in Title Bout 2 will return to the pool of seasons to projects to pick from. A heavyweight tournament in boxing would have been a lot of fun to do, but I'll reset both dials here. I actually did a much smaller tournament back in 2023, a greatest boxer tournament in Title Bout 2. But now that I'm getting the feel for streaming and getting everything laid out a lot better, I probably would have been streaming that. And in first place, to the surprise likely of absolutely nobody, except possibly for my non-existent cat, the 1971 season for baseball. That would be a season ticket baseball replay. And for that one, we will be rolling 5 white dice. So now you guys hopefully see how your votes are influencing the projects that come out during the summer project selection show. You see how the more votes a project gets, the more dice it rolls. We've got round 1 here. We're either going to be doing another baseball season replay and season ticket, or a combined replay for hockey between Strat and Inside the Crease. Let's find out what we're doing this summer. Taking away a 1 from baseball, as that's got more dice. We see a 12, 14 for baseball to an 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's actually a win for hockey, so hockey gets a start. So that's a 1. So 1-0 for hockey going into round 2. We're going to roll 2. Let's see what happens here. Taking away a 1 for baseball, we see 3, 9, 14 for baseball to 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 for hockey. So hockey now with a 2-0 lead. Holy cow. Apparently the dice look like so far they want me to do a hockey season replay. Let's see what happens in round 3. Baseball's got to get it together if you want him on center stage, Philip. Taking away, that's a cocked die, we'll re-roll that. Oh wow, that actually kind of screwed. The 6 didn't make it in, that's why I re-rolled that. So taking away a 1 from baseball, wow, holy cow. Make it, well, it's probably a little bit late now. That might have been for a previous roll. There's some lag, I know there's lag in chat from what I'm doing. But anyway, we took away a 1 from baseball. We've got a 5, 11 for baseball to 12, 17 for hockey. So hockey's leading 3-0. Baseball has got to win 4 straight rolls, or else I'm doing a replay of the 2009-10 NHL season. That would be a great season to replay for Chicago Blackhawks fans, as that's the first year in like 54 years or something crazy since the Blackhawks last won the Stanley Cup. So we've got round 4, hockey trying to run the table. Baseball, it looks like it's going to show it's got some fight left. Taking away the 1 from baseball, we'll pull out a 9, 10, 11, 12 to a 12, 14. So baseball gets a win here. Baseball's 3-1, but baseball still has to run the table. Roll 5. Does baseball show it still has fight? We'll find out. We'll take away the 1 from baseball. Let's see, that's a 10, 12, 14 to 9, 14. That's actually tied, so we got to re-roll that. So we got to re-roll round 5. Baseball looks like it's going to show it's still got some fight. So a 2 coming out. Let's see. We've got a 2, 4, 9 for hockey to 6, 10, 19 for baseball. So 1971 baseball is trying to fight back. 3-2 now. We might be doing baseball. The way these dice are starting to roll, we might be doing baseball in the summer. Roll 6. Can baseball come back and force a roll 7? We'll find out. Taking away the 2. That's going to be a 17 for baseball to 10, 11. And baseball has come all the way back to force a roll 7. Wow. But before we get to roll 7, I need to take a small break. So I'll be right back. Pardon the rustling and the cursing you were probably hearing coming out of the kitchen, but everything comes down to this. Hockey was up 3-0 in the roll against baseball, but baseball has come all the way back to force a roll 7. Everything comes down to this. I'm either doing 1971 baseball or 2009-10 hockey in the summer. Which one are we doing? Only the dice know for sure, and in order for the dice to tell us for sure, we have to roll them. So let's find out. That 4 is cocked. I'll re-roll that. Taking away the 1 from baseball. Let's total all of this up. 6, 10, 15 for baseball. 6, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 for hockey. Which means by a roll of 4-3, the summer 2025 project is going to be 2009-10 in hockey. That'll be a combined replay. As I mentioned, that will be a combined replay between Stratomatic hockey and Inside the Crease hockey. Let me make a note of that, and then we'll talk a little bit about logistics about that. Okay, so as 2009-10 hockey has won, and that is going to be a combined replay, let's talk a little bit about logistics for that replay. So, as I mentioned, there are two. I have 2009-10 in 2 systems. I have it in Inside the Crease hockey and Stratomatic hockey. I do want to spotlight both games on the channel. So there are a few ways we're going to do that. The first way is, if you're familiar with my replays, I like to start them with a demo game. In this case, as we've got 2 systems that we're going to be featuring, there will be 2 separate demo games. And I'm actually going to be doing a little bit of testing with one of them later this week, but I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get closer to it. So in addition to having 2 demo games, I'm going to alternate the two. But I'm going to let you guys decide which one I start with. Normally when I put polls up on the channel, they're not binding polls, where I'll usually say something like, this poll isn't going to be binding, but I will take the votes here into consideration as I'm figuring out what I want to do. I'm working on making some kind of decision, whether it's content schedule or or other things like that. This poll that I put up for this project will be binding. I will let you guys decide what system I start with, but then I'm going to alternate between the two on the replay. Also, another change I'm going to be making is in the playoffs when we get that far. I realize we're a long way away as we just decided what sport and system we're going to be replaying in, but I do want to talk a little bit about the playoffs already. Every single series in the NHL playoffs is a best of 7. I am not doing best of 7 for every single series. I would be at that for another 6 months probably if I did that. So the way I'm going to do it is and we'll probably talk about this a little bit more on the feature game selection show when that comes up later. But the way I'm going to do the playoffs is the first round, we're still going to take all 16 teams like normal. But the first round is going to be a 1-game elimination, like you saw in the wild card games in the playoffs. Then the next round will be best of 3 once we compress it down. Then the conference championships will be best of 5, and the Stanley Cup Finals will be best of 7, and I'll alternate in that series. So, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about logistics, but I need to have Friday's video as scheduled. As part of my content schedule, but I'll talk about that probably on Wednesday after that game. So that will finally do it for the 1985 season recap and reveal show. We've closed the book on 1985, and next we're doing 2009-10 in hockey. Once again, combined replay between Strat and Inside the Crease hockey. Thank you for watching the video. Please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to turn on notifications so you get my content. Be well, stay safe, take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and I'll be back with more videos in the future. Until then, take care everyone.